And we're here. We're here again.
Here again.
Hey, Greg. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. It's so nice to be back up here on the mountain. Our mountain, your mountain.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, the garden was really cool and stuff, but here you really see the seasons more, and you see them more, there's less cultivation. It's the trees take over here. The trees dominate rather than the tomatoes.
That's right.
And I kind of like I love tomatoes and the chickens there, but the trees, there's something eternal when you're around these trees.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, you're more in tune, perhaps, with observing the phenology of how the trees work, right? How the cyclical nature of all arboreal life here, and which is the crux, I think, of our little podcast experiment here. November, we're here in November.
It's November,
it's
and we're all bundled up here. It's cold this morning. It's cold. It changed so fast. The seasons, like we didn't do fall. We went from summer to winter. It seems.
Yeah. I think it's very normal to have our first rain like we had this week on Halloween. Right, first day of November tends to be the first day that it rains. Or it's been that way over the past 8 years or so.
But when I was a kid, it wasn't so much rain; it was frost,
and
we don't have the frost anymore. So usually by October, by Halloween, we'd had at least 1 or 2 or 3 frosts.
No, we haven't.
And for the last 8 years or so, there hasn't been frost.
Yeah.
In fact, last year we only had, I think, up here, maybe 6 or 7 nights of it. And we didn't have snow last year either. But usually we get a little covering of snow a couple times a year up here. But back to the trees, Obi, I just wanted to mention, one of the things about the trees is I always like to try to imagine what these trees have seen, what their ancestors have seen. And, if you look at them, they'll tell a story. They'll tell a story of the fire scars, the fires that have gone through here.
Sure.
50, 60, 80, 100 years ago. And so I guess I always look at the trees and, think of the stories they could tell.
Yeah. Well, these bay trees, right, are, what their ancestors have seen, what they have seen. I mean, these trees are a couple of 100 years old. I think that's Umbularia tends to live about that long. These bay nut trees,
and
these are old.
These
are about as old as bay trees get.
Yeah, there's one across the road that a guy was here, and he said it's probably 300 years old. It's probably
300,
very old. And he said this grove here. So imagine, Obi, my ancestors came up here, and by the way, I told you before, they're females.
Yes.
So this was a cultivated grove.
Yeah.
And if they're 200 years old, they were young at the time of European contact, and probably some older ones here at the time of European contact.
Yeah. Cultivated.
Yeah.
I appreciate your use of that word. Right.
Cultivated.
Right. It means something very different than the agrarian traditions, the extractivist traditions that dominate the petrol cultures of today.
Yeah, we did cultivate. I mean, we saw it and here in California, particularly Central California, in this area, our areas were so small. So our tribal or national territories were so small. We basically. We saw it as our garden. We cultivated. We knew every tree. We knew every animal that was through it. We knew where the quail laid their eggs. We knew where the ducks, if we were down by the lagoon, where they would, ducks and geese when they came through, where they laid their eggs. So we knew that landscape that intimately. So there was nothing wild or unpruned or uncultivated in the Aboriginal, in the first world here, because we knew the landscape so intimately. We knew where to burn. We watched the seasons. We didn't look at a calendar and say, well, we're going to do a controlled burning on this weekend. We waited until weather was right for certain areas and the wind was right in certain areas so that the fire wouldn't get out of control.
so core to the indigenous critique that you and I discuss again and again in this series. You know, that we these hoops of life. I mean, I was influenced from an early age by the vision that Black Elk had on Harney Peak in South Dakota, about like how he saw not only his people in a circle, but all peoples.
The tree that he had,
right?
so,
Exactly.
his vision.
And that was you know, Mabel talks about
Yeah.
that. Mabel McKay
Yeah.
talks about how in the Roundhouse at LaSalle, it was like there was an inventory taken almost of all the people, all the other than human people, and that sort of like it was almost like a roll call. It sounds
well,
like.
and even though there were nations and territories, people were constantly adopted in, and then there were secret cults. Not cults. People don't like that word. You told me. Secret societies where they were international. That kept people together. So there were groups. You might want to call them types of ceremonial organizations that were comprised of people from different groups. And then you married in obviously different groups and things like that. So, for instance, my great-great-great-grandmother, Supu, who was born in the original village of Petaluma, she was 14 when Vallejo brought her into the fort there. But she was born in Petaluma, but one parent came from near Tamales, another came from Bodega Bay, and they were somehow ended up having her in Petaluma. So, and that was before people moved around, but they would do that. And the other thing for survival, when they started doing the dream dance cult here, different people would come. For example, at the Kashaya Reservation, where the Bole Maru or dream dance lasted until way into the 1970s, where most other places it died in the 20s, the first leaders actually came from faraway tribes. They weren't even from those tribes. They came in there and they said, this is a way to do it. We adopted in. We took care of one another and saw the benefit of international relationships.
International relationships.
As with all of nature. I mean, where does nature begin and where does it end? Draw a line and I'll give you my house.
That's right. Well, to get back to the seasonality of November, right here, you were mentioning that the green of the grass, the annuals are coming up already. And they were coming up even before the rains that we had 2 days ago. And we're in for it now. It looks like we're just going to have wave after wave of rainstorms.
We got so lucky. Today is the only day. I believe it starts raining again tomorrow.
Right.
For a week.
Yes.
So the spirits, the trees said, Greg and Obi, get down there and start talking. We'll give you one day.
What else have you seen here in the fall? I see, gosh, on the way up here today, Greg, I drove up 37 across the San Pablo Bay Wildlife Refuge, and there at the mouth of the Napa River, and the murmurations of shorebirds. It's one of the most eloquent emergent phenomena that I know of in the world in the animal world is the way that the birds flow and wave with this sort of dance of the breath of God. You know, it is a vision.
Something to think about too, Obi. Here, remember, we're in the flyway. And there was so much water here, pre-contact, but the stories are endless of going into marshlands and wetlands and birds flying up so thick that they blotted out the sun for hours at a time. And
that seed remains. That seed remains. You know, we're now in the time of like if you want hope, like go find it written still on the land.
See some of those birds still coming. They're still there. These geese, the poor geese, they're confused and whatever, but they're living on people's front lawns. They're coming back. They're looking. They have ancestral memory. And they're following light. They're following things that you and I don't understand to a place. And then, of course, they land and it's not exactly the way it was, but they're trying to make do, and that's life ongoing.
That- Gosh, I had to coming up the hill today. I had to drive like 5 or 10 miles an hour because this cloud of sparrows came around me. It must have been about 50 to 100 sparrows,
Yeah.
just all around the car.
Yeah.
Just like they seem to they recognize my car as an
Yeah.
object moving through space, but like it was. I was very careful. If I had just plowed through them, they probably,
This road coming up the mountain, you have to be so careful, especially at night. But there's rabbits and deer and everything running out into the road, and of course we're just getting. One of the things I've noticed that we're getting towards the end, very late this year. They're still rutting a bit, rutting season, and the deer are getting, the bucks are getting somewhat ready to shed their antlers. The antlers are looking a little old, a little shiny, and I watch them. This one guy. I have plants out in front of the house. He loves to come and rub his antlers on them and, of course, smash my plants in the process. But I went out there yesterday and I said, go somewhere else and wreck some other plant or do whatever you need to do for your horns, antlers. But I noticed that the bucks are still following closely the does.
Yeah.
And it's a little late, which usually would mean that it's going to be a long winter. The babies, the fawns, will be born later in spring. Last year they were done in early October.
Let's encourage that. A long winter.
Yeah, that's
Sounds
what it looks
good.
like now.
Okay.
And the bird. I've noticed that the woodpeckers, the jays, are even the crows and ravens up in this area are working really hard this year, storing nuts, which would be another sign that they're anticipating a stretch of time when they're going to need food.
It was a good acorn year. I don't know if it was a mast year.
It was a excellent year.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it like that up
Okay.
here for a long time. The bay 2 years ago, the last couple of years before this one, the bays were just off the hook. I mean, just tons of nuts. It was average this year, but the acorns came through. And the birds can eat either one. They use both. So what a blessing for them.
Very good. Well, I'd love to encourage our listeners as we live cast this podcast now to if you're in the chat or in the comments, and if you're watching this live, you can send me your questions, or at least my producers will send them to me, and we can discuss them live. Observations about what's going on is great, because I've also noticed like the toyon berries are having their own sort of mast year. I'm not exactly sure how they are linked up, but I'm sure it's in a similar way to how the oak trees are. And the poison oak also. Poison oak is we must remember, it's like we're the only animal that has a allergic reaction to it, right? The berries of the poison oak plant are fundamental to the ecology of the oak woodland. And everything from cedar waxwings to the robins to
everything. They're very dependent.
to all terrestrial mammals.
I keep that big. They've lost their leaves there, but see that hole against the hillside there? That you can just see the bit of leaves. That's a huge clump of poison oak that's been there forever. And I kind of try to keep it out of the rest of the garden, but I don't want to get rid of it. I love it there. And the birds and the rattlesnakes live underneath it in the summer, so it's a home there.
Well, as we were talking about the inventory of all beings, right? The hoop, and even the word medicine, like getting back to Mabel McKay, because we have a lot of interest from our listeners about Mabel McKay.
Before I have a
question.
Yes. We used to use the poison oak, the berries, for tattooing. We use that for tattooing.
No kidding.
So
okay.
On the women that would tattoo their chins and so forth. But we tattooed with the poison oak. But anyway, go ahead.
That's a great look. Reading your book, Weaving the Dream, the Mabel McKay story, there's a number of things that strike me there, Greg, and I think that, and here's a thought I had, and I want to, and this is me sort of maybe building a structure of cosmology, really, to what is put forth in her story, which is like, under this umbrella of what can be called like medicine, right? And I think I'm going to get back to how this applies to a very November kind of story, but I think like this umbrella of medicine, where you have this layer of reality that's called spirit, that informs her, that gave her the second tongue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll talk about what the second tongue is in a minute.
Yeah.
But like, you have spirit, and then you have power.
Yeah.
Like, is there, and power, as we've talked about in previous episodes, is like, the potential for agency towards whatever system, over something, or in something, right? And then there's this third leg, which is the dangerous leg, and this is all danger. I mean, it's all together in some, but then there's this poison aspect to it as well. And I think it's best encapsulated, since we've had such like an interesting, we've had such reaction in our audience for about stories from Mabel McKay. There was a time when she was delivering lectures down at Stanford.
Yeah. And
if you remember, there was one woman who fainted.
That was at Santa Cruz, yes.
Oh, in Santa Cruz.
Yes, UC Santa Cruz, yeah.
And it's related to Mabel's baskets.
Yeah.
And it's related to power. Now, she shouldn't have touched her.
Yeah.
And she touched her and she fainted.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. Well, Mabel, again, with a lot of the medicine people and the old rule here, and it is there's a few rules among all indigenous people, tribal people, that are ubiquitous. One is incest, is taboo, and the other one is the menstrual taboo. They both have their real, if we want to talk about the practical sides, we can. Again, remember, the Jewish tradition, the first people to write tribal law had the menstrual taboo. But again, wherever you are in the desert, or if you're here with grizzly bears or whatever, there's things that smell blood that will kill you. So there's a practical reason, and people have always taken practical things and rolled them into religious law for protection. It just kind of goes together. The New Testament that was written, Obi, 200 years after Jesus was here, has all this stuff about extramarital sex, but at the time it was being written, syphilis was rampant, right? So we can look at some of these practical things, and it gets rolled in. Anyway,
how the mythology responds to the environment.
They're intertwined, and then become one and the other, and become spiritual and everything else. If, for example, you don't have that bifurcation of the spiritual and the material, the menstrual taboo becomes, if you want to use the word, spiritual or religious, right? And so, anyway, Mabel, as a medicine woman and following the old rules, was very vulnerable to menstrual blood. She couldn't doctor a woman who was menstruating. She didn't want, and she could smell it. I remember a time when there was 100 people in a room, and she came in to talk, and she said, she gave the people her rule. And it's really hard for us Westerners, and women particularly today, to understand that, or not to feel chastised or put aside, or it is a difficult thing. But she said her rule that if anybody was menstruating, they had to leave. And about a minute after she spoke, she pointed to a woman in the room and she said, "You're menstruating. Please leave." So with this heightened sense of smell and everything else, she could tell. She could tell. So with that in mind, let's get back to this whole idea of power. And it's really an important thing, because people like Mabel and these medicine people were incredibly powerful. They could use songs, as I've told you, to open tunnels in the fog. I saw her raise a man that was 6 feet tall, 3 feet off a couch with a song. She could do many things, as these people could. But they also had rules they had to follow, and if they didn't or did things wrong, multitudes of things would come back on them. In the West, we assume power with ultimate control,
Right.
which is very different from the Indian
Very
notion
different.
of Mabel's notion of power. Her notion of power was to heal and fix, but power or misuse of it could also undo you.
That's
So
right.
there was no sense that you were there was nothing, the notion of power to control is alien to the indigenous world. Power to control predicates the Western thinking of power, right? In the West, I want to have power over you so you will do what I say, or you'll work and I can make money off you, or I can get your land or do whatever I want to do. But in the Indian way, if I have power, I can do certain things to heal you. But if I violate those larger laws of nature, it's going to come back and get me.
Mm. That's right.
So it's a very different, and that's when, people were reading Castaneda, and the problem with Castaneda is the West were so taken with that because they were going to have personal power. They thought they were going to have this personal power where they could do these magic things. They didn't understand that it wasn't power as they understood it. It's an indigenous sense of power that had rules.
Could it be the power, to phrase it another way, let me see if I got this right, the power of insight into a chord,
Yeah.
right, as opposed to this extractivist power that we have
That's a good way to put it, Obi. That's a good way to understand it. The other thing is, at least for Mabel and for Essie, they, as I've said before, the one way that I could explain Mabel and people who have power or that I've known who've had these spirit things, relationships, let's say, there was a total surrender of the ego. Notice voices came to Mabel and she's listening. There's no ego involved. She couldn't do anything. In fact, if you see in the book, she was a young girl having dreams. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want this hard life of following rules. She was born in a contemporary world, and she didn't want to do this. And the spirit said, then I'm going to kill you. You have no choice. So she ran away. She worked in Sally Stanford's house of prostitution in San Francisco as a maid. She did all kinds of things, danced the Charleston, did these things. And then at 19, it caught up with her, and she was dying. And that's when she was in her grandmother's house in the valley over there near Woodland, Coppay. And it was a very hot day. And Albert Thomas, I just told his name, flew in the form of a hummingbird and said, Mabel, are you going to let me take you to the waters now? And she said, yeah, I guess so, because I'm going to die otherwise. And he goes, that's right. So, and then she was told this by the spirit, when I'm done with you, I'll take you back. You're going to die.
Right.
Now, how glamorous is that to people in the West who want power? It's a total surrender of the ego. So, and there were all the funny.
There's a psychological shift that occurs when the ego that perceives the it of nature as opposed to the thou of nature.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So for Mabel in this indigenous mindset, there is no boundary between objecthood and subjectivity.
No.
It's on a continuum. There's no
That's what's so
particularization.
hard for Westerners, Obi, to understand. Because again, in the West, it's given that those things are separate.
Right.
It's given.
Right.
That's how we learned our world.
Right.
And for the indigenous person, and even in the before contact, when we had a lot of these secret societies, a 12 or 13-year-old had to go through that on a vision quest or whatever they had to go through to undo the primacy of quote-unquote rational or bifurcated thinking. So they saw the bigger world. Again, as Essie Parrish used to say, the great Kashaya dreamer, she said, people always want to, as she put it, analyze me. but she said, my mind, how it works. And she said, one half of my mind, I see beautiful cars, I see people, I see objects, as you're saying. But she said, the other side of my mind, I see the everlasting. And the everlasting resides in me and the world. And so these people had in touch with that. Obi, we're lucky. I mean, if I get glimmers of it. When you saw those sparrows around your car, you can't explain that, can you? You could start thinking about it, but you didn't bring them there. You didn't control them.
Explaining. That's right. Yeah, I have a very, I have a scientific temper. Right.
Sure,
So
yeah, because that's how you grew
right,
up.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It is. It is. I mean, I think that there is a cultural pathos here that we need to reckon with, and it's related to, it's related to justice. I think of like Prop 1 that we're all going to be voting on Tuesday here, or I hope you got your ballots
already
in
voted
now. As we're talking about, like, is family planning and reproductive choice actually an environmental and cultural issue? It absolutely is.
Sure. I mean, if you believe in sovereignty, how are you going to limit a woman's sovereignty over her body?
It's so easy to jump around topics here,
but anyway, let's go back to that.
I think we're here in autumn, so we're telling stories of transition, especially, and I think Election Day is very symbolic of that, right? As we're sort of marching calendrically towards the winter solstice, the darkest of days. The days are getting smaller now and colder, and I think mythologically maybe we are in a season of death, symbolized by Halloween, which we just celebrated
Dia de los
here.
Muertos.
Yes, Dia de los Muertos. That's right. So there's this turning in the year. So we always have these circles, right? We always have the shape of the basket. Which is mirrored in our own lives, right? I mean, here you and I are not necessarily spring chickens. You got a few years on me, but here we are in the autumn of our life, talking, and it might be the autumn of Western civilization. I mean, I don't mean that to be any kind of gloomy thought, but I wonder about what story. But at the same time, it's harvest time. That's right.
Yes.
So the objectness of the season is yet another illusion of that.
Exactly. But power. I want to say something, Obi, because I don't want listeners to think, or you to think, that science doesn't become spiritual and spiritual doesn't become science. Because let's go back. I wasn't there. I'm not that old, but I imagine that when people discovered that blood will attract a tiger or a grizzly bear, that's science. They said, oh my God, we can't go out or have a woman go out because they're going to get eaten. That's science. And it became religious. So ultimately, those two things are inextricable and roll into one another. It wasn't that Mabel or other people aren't scientific. I mean, she'll figure out where the best roots are and how to dig them. The spirit may tell her, but it's also tied to years, generations of practicing, changing, adapting, practical things, how to pick up a stick, which is a scientific sort of thing, will become then part of a dream. So I think
you're using science as like epistemology. You're using it as a way of encapsulating a mode of thinking of the world.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the scientific method, which is a very specific thing.
Well, how is it? Tell me then, how is the scientific method different from testing different nets to catch fish?
Okay. Well, that's a process for sure.
Yeah.
If it's repeatable.
Yeah.
If you have a hypothesis that is then tested via experiment towards conclusion, yes or no. This is a bad net. This is a good net. That is the science.
But isn't that how the good net came about, just like penicillin came about?
For sure. But there is another kind of, you can use the word science in terms of like ritualistic science. This idea like this is what we do culturally, in order to be reciprocally in accord with our power. I think of like stories of like of what hunters, and this gets actually it's when you think of getting back to female power with menstruation, you have male power with the emergence from the sweat,
Yeah.
from the cave, right? Which is might be symbolic of the womb, kind of. We are reborn to and then you have stories where the hunter becomes the meat, right? So I am of you, and this atoning relationship, so that I understand what you are giving. This meat is freely given to us because it is of me, right? And those kind of stories that exist in indigenous cultures across the planet, in order to make sure that it is ever fecund. If we do not employ those kinds of epistemologies or even ontologies, right? Why is this stuff everywhere? Why does it keep on giving to us? Apparently, this is what we see. This is what we know. When we lose those stories, when we lose that ritual, we take on this severing. We take on this trauma. We take on this shame and guilt that is rampant in my peers now, today, in the 21st century.
The fall from the garden, if you want.
Well, sure. The fall from the garden that gives that makes all of nature the it.
Yeah.
Or you are estranged. You are alienated from. You're not inside of that circle.
Well,
I don't mean to equate indigenous thought with paradise.
No, and I don't want either. We're human. There were always problems. We get jealous. We do different things. But I think that I mean, this is, I don't want to be reductionist here, but I think that science, what one of the things that a belief that predicates science is that they're going to be able to figure everything out eventually. You keep trying to figure things out. And so you're moving in one direction. And I think that's kind of an illusion. But the indigenous people didn't want to figure things out as much as they wanted to keep talking, keep a dialogue between things, because things themselves are always changing.
Okay.
So science that's going to figure things out is always going to be chasing its own tail, because things are going to always be evolving and changing and coming up.
Yeah.
Surprise is a big thing in science, serendipity. But I think the indigenous folks were always dialoguing, assuming that they're always going to only be able to understand partially. They'll never have, and this goes back to what we were talking about, Obi, control. They'll never have control. In fact, that sense of control will get you in trouble ultimately.
Yeah, we're certainly finding that out right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, as we are pondering the lifespan of this whole experiment, this modernist experiment. But me, as a philosophical optimist, meaning that, and this is where it gets sticky for me, is that I believe that things mean things. It's part of my.
Oh, sure.
It's part of my proclivity. I mean, there's a whole school of thought that's very much alive and well right now. It's from Cartesian knowledge through Hegel, through Kant, even, where you have this correlationist theory, where you have things only exist because humans perceive them to exist. You get very quickly to something like nihilism, which is philosophical pessimism, right? Which is nothing means anything.
Nothing means anything, and therefore you die. It doesn't matter. The world ends. That's a dangerous thing, because you have to understand that we know that when you and I die, the world isn't going to end, and that there's consequences and life's going to go on. We're all here to carry on, if you will, this great evolution, this coevolution. And if that were true, I almost feel like laughing. if if the world only exists because we're here. Now, granted, I may die and it won't exist, but neither will I.
Yeah.
But I do know and I do believe that once I'm gone, things will still be here. I believe I won't know it in the same way or at all, but I believe that things will be here. I believe otherwise. My God, Obi, why did the Creator give us sex? Why are we recreating? Why do animals recreate? Because things go on. Birds make nests because they are going to pass on, and that part of life that is integral, gathering acorns or doing whatever they're doing here, needs to go on as part of the whole. We're just experiencing a moment in the whole of this life. And what are we going to do? I think humans, well, particularly lately and of the West, have got this bad idea that, and much of it has come out of, notice the industrial age and Kant and all them, modernism, all came out around the same time.
Yeah.
That great separation, that notion of control, which was aligned with corporate, well, it used to be industrial, but now it's corporate greed. So you can get more things, and it's a runaway system that's gotten out of control, but it will correct itself. It's correcting itself, and it's going to be a not pretty picture if we don't do something.
We've got a whole family of quail back there clucking away.
Yes. They'll line up on the fence and watch us. Maybe they'll think I hope they think we're smart.
Have you gotten to know them? Because that quail family is probably the same quail family. Quails can live their whole life in just a few miles.
I have to say something, and I hope my neighbors don't hear it, but they had a couple cats that they would let out, and my property, I try to create a sanctuary, no cats, no anything. And the quail have come in here every year and there's under my bushes here and have their babies. And it's so wonderful. They have huge clutches of babies. I mean, they have like 15. I mean, and the first couple days of their lives, they're very vulnerable. They can't run fast. They're little balls. Then they pretty much take off. But the cats, kill the quail and have really compromised the quail everywhere, and grouse everywhere. Domestic cats have wreaked havoc. And my neighbors, who I love, they're wonderful people. The one guy's a rabbi there. Anyway, I said something about I used to throw rocks at the cats when they were around here, but keep them over off his property. But anyway, I hadn't seen the cats, and I said, I haven't seen your cats. And he goes, he said, the bobcat ate them.
Bobcat got the cats, got the domestic cats.
Yeah.
Feline wars.
Yes. So, but again, the bobcats aren't really interested in those little chicks. They need bigger meals. They won't. Domestic cats play with lizards. And
bobcats just had kittens here?
Yes, they did. I heard. I haven't seen them, but I heard about them.
Keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Very good. So, tie it back to me. I want to talk about power some more. I want to talk about very specifically, though, as we're here in Election Day. I want to talk about Prop 30. Do you know about this one?
Which is
that's the one for the it allocates tax revenue towards zero emission vehicle purchase initiatives and vehicle charging stations and wildfire prevention. And it's tax revenue for Californians making over $2 million a year. Right. And Gavin Newsom is against it. The Democrats are for it. So this is a very interesting sort of conversation I have, and I think the most interesting thing about this conversation is the conversation that's not really being had, is that we're not going to drive our way out of this problem, whatever this problem is, and by this problem I mean this extractivist nature, this power, this illusion of control.
Yeah.
And I think it's so encapsulated in this proposition. Like we have this prescriptive idea that we're going to tax the rich to build electronic charging stations and give 20% to fighting wildfires, and it's like, all right. As if electric cars are going to quote unquote save us.
Solve the world, yeah.
Yes, which they very, very much are not. I mean, the carbon footprint of an electric car is equivalent to a 1970s V8 Camaro, because of the footprint of the battery. It's just displaced. Tesla weighs twice as much as a normal car. You go through twice as many tires. It's like, what are we
the batteries
and that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, the mining footprint, right?
Yeah.
So
make me
what
feel guilty about my Tesla, but yes.
Well, there's that guilt again, right? As I was talking about before, from the severing of you, as if you are not part of the world. Mm-hmm. Which is
if you think that one thing by doing this is somehow going to mitigate everything else, all the other problems, or fix something.
Yeah, that's right. And what is that? That terrible lack of power, that vision of the end of the quote unquote world. It might turn out that the world worlds come and go, don't they? I mean, it's sort of a cheap concept, what the world is. The world doesn't end.
No.
There's no power that humans have. Yeah. I mean, we could set off all 70,000 of our nuclear warheads at once. It would be a tiny fraction of what happened when the meteor hit the 65 million years ago, right? Yeah. So like this fear of the void, which is what if the nihilists are right? Which is what I feel like the young people are actually screaming when they're saying save the planet.
Yeah.
What if the nihilists are right? What if I am a construct of my own ego, right? Which is entirely possible. So how do we give the children their power, which is ultimately...
Well, I think the real danger, though, of that kind of thinking is there's nothing to stop prejudice, greed, and all of these other things, selfishness, because that is a philosophy that says it's just me, and it isn't just you. Because everything you put in your mouth is something else. You're not here alone. You're dependent. Whether you even think it's a myth that, I'm just here eating and then it's going to stop or whatever. But that kind of thinking is the end game of us being separate from nature. It's the end game. It's how far we get when we think that way. And for me, it's that would be so easy. It's selfish. It's kind of like the whole idea where you hear people say, well, the guy that dies with the most toys wins. Right?
Yes. No, you're absolutely correct.
He doesn't win. He dies. And he can't, as far as I know, they don't go up there with him, What?
There's no winning.
There is no winning. That's the whole point. I mean, and again, that goes back to the thing we're talking about, Obi, the notion that we can control, that we can win, that we can get something. Football, baseball, dudes, it's just a game.
Yeah.
You're going to win one, you're going to lose one.
Right.
But you're not winning forever.
Right.
And so I don't know. There's something deep inside of me that says, you have to, as much as possible, give back and give what you know in a way that life might go on and possibly go on better. I can't think otherwise. I think of my mother, who had me at 16 and she died 10 days later. So she died, and I'm just here and can do whatever I want. Somebody gave their life for me. Am I here just to get a bunch of toys and make life difficult for other people? Because my behavior has consequences, Obi.
You've gone through some transformations in your life. I wonder at the enormous psychic fracture that occurred between your identities when you realized that the place that you had been coming to and the people you had visiting, you were actually surrounded by family members.
Yeah.
There was a time in your life,
blood, yeah.
blood,
yeah.
when you actually realized your identity shifted. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, I am Native Californian.
But let's go back to Mabel on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm with you. I thought, oh my God, I am Indian, and I went running to Mabel, and I may have said this before, Obi. I went running to Mabel with a picture of my father, and she just looked at him and she said, "Oh, he's cute." And I wanted her to say, "Oh, I knew you were Indian and all of this. I've been training you because I knew you had Indian blood, all this." And all she said to me, Obi, is, "You'll never be anything different or more or less than your experience of where it got you here now." You can't, Indian and blood does not presuppose point of view, Obi. So in some ways, I'll always be an orphan. I'll always be a wanderer. But that informs me. That's my gift, because I see the pain and the insecurity it brings, and I want to take and help others so that they can have a home. It's a gift. Yeah, it's hard, and you have a lot of that stuff, and it's but again, what Mabel said to me when I was 19, and she said, with all that's happened to you, and this goes for all of us.
Yeah.
You can either take what has happened to you or what you know, and you can feel hate or greed or power in your heart and try to power or hate or have greed over others or anger, or she said you can turn it to medicine and doctor. She said, you already got hate. That's easy. Try the other. And the best moments of my life, when she was a little girl and having dreams of poison and all the evil things, difficult poisons on earth, she had to learn those things because she would encounter them in her life and have the opportunity to fix them. Whatever happened to me, and that's what she was saying, becomes an opportunity for you to fix or doctor or heal, rather than feel sorry for yourself, rather than be a victim. My God, she was the last of her tribe, the last speaking her language. She had baskets in the museum, and she stood in line in an apple cannery peeling apples. There was never a poor me moment in her.
What was that? What was her language? Sulphur Creek?
Lolsel Pomo, yeah.
Yeah.
Creek, Pomo, yeah. Right on the border of the wind tune there.
Well, on that note, we have a question from our listeners here. November is Native American Heritage Month, as well as the month in which we celebrate Thanksgiving, quote unquote, and its misleading origins. Can you discuss your thoughts on Indigenous celebrations and historical inaccuracies during this season?
Well, again, I mean, it's there's multiple things here. Let's talk about just the pilgrim thing. It became a national myth, and if you read Phil Deloria's article, it was in the New Yorker a year ago on this. He's a professor at Harvard, and he did a very good article about the origins of this and the mythical origins of this, of Indian people giving Native people, helping the indigenous people live. And they obviously showed them certain birds and things to eat and that stuff like that. But remember, they were also being killed by the same people. So it is Native American Month. In fact, I'm going on Tuesday back to the Smithsonian. I'm on the board of the National Museum of the American Indian, and we're opening the National American Indian Vets Building on Veterans Day. But the question is, the whole issue of Thanksgiving becomes just another form of liking Indians once we're defeated. We're safe. We become safe. As I've always said, we're either they love us when we've been defeated, or we're the poor and wonderful and giving nature gods. But once it's a question of power or territory, we're wagon burners.
Right.
So I like that, Thanksgiving might make you remember us, but don't just remember us as complex people who are here today, who've endured and survived a legacy of disruption from our land. In many cases, we've become, like everybody else, strangers in our home place.
Mm.
So how do we come back, and what do we do? And every time we get something, they come after us, Prop 27, and to take away to impinge on our casinos or whatever. And so I'll say this, let me just be a little crude here, if I may, and thank you for the question. It's important. And it's important to celebrate. It's a great day to get together with a family. You should do that. And you should be thankful that some relationship with Indians allowed you to get together with your family. That's a good thing. But as I say today, with the casino, our casino resort, or resort casino, we have a good business, and we're sharing it with others, our generosity. And I'm going to say, every day for us now is Thanksgiving Day, but we're going to keep the turkey and give it out as we see fit.
Very good, very good. I've been thinking about this too in the book "The Dawn of Everything" by Graber and Wengrow, two economists. Well, one's an economist and one's I think an anthropologist actually. They put forth, like, you must remember that democracy, modern democracy, would not exist without the Native American. Like we have
it was the Iroquois
in our institutions every day.
Model.
Right, exactly. We probably wouldn't have had the Enlightenment.
No.
If not for the ideas that we found on the North American that Europe found on the North American continent in the 16th century.
Food.
That's right.
That's things that are not just in this country, but throughout the world, everything from corn to tomatoes and squash and all those things. But the democratic form of the government with the Iroquois nation and their municipalities and all of that, we got that. Remember, we were running from a monarchy. So, and there were, all Europe was dominated by that kind of structure. There wasn't democracy. They found it here. And, Obi, maybe that's what you and I are talking about right now. What else can we find here from the indigenous past that can inform a healthy future where people don't have a voice, but they have a safe home, a survivable home? A
survivable home. Rousseau mentions that in The Social Contract, that a fundamental indigenous critique of economic power is the disconnect between how economic power gives you control over another human.
Yeah, we talked about that at the top of this conversation.
Right, exactly.
We're doing a basket.
We're making a basket. That's right.
Yeah.
We also have another question about seasonal storytelling. Right.
We're just about getting ready. Obi and I can sit here and start telling stories in the old ways. Of course, I break all those rules all the time and tell stories all summer long.
I'm an artist. I was never handed the rules. I don't know any rules.
Yeah. Well, for us, you never told stories until after the first frost or rain, and only in wintertime. You told stories in wintertime because you had, first of all, a lot of time, but there weren't snakes and things around and you were staying closer home. So that's when you told the stories. As Mabel said, when you start to go out in the spring and summer again, you're living the stories, you're becoming the stories, you're taking the lessons you've learned from what you heard all winter long, but don't think about them, live them. Because if you're thinking too much or telling stories, you're going to step on a snake. So winter is a time to think, ponder, reflect on where you've been in the last seasons. See, they all agree with us. And then they're saying it's time to talk. And then in the summer, you're actually living those stories again. You become story again in your life. And so you have to live it and pay attention with what you've learned. But you can't sit there and be analyzing as I do when I walk around here all summer long, thinking about stories or thinking about what I'm going to talk to Obi about or thinking about this, because in the old days you might run right into a bear, right? Or step on a snake. You had to be totally engaged in the world when you're out in it.
Yes.
The rest of the time as humans, we can do our human gift thing, which is storytelling, when we have time and can sit and think, not when we're walking through engaging with a world where we're not totally powerful.
Oh, yes. Very good. Very
Right.
good.
So that's the way I kind of understand it. Mabel used to say, only tell stories in the winter time. And then, of course, I used to ask her about other things of, when people would get sick or something. And one of her great disclaimers, I said, what happened to that person? They got sick. And Mabel goes, that's what we call not following the rules sickness. So there was all kinds of rules and all of that. And,
well, that gets to what Barry Lopez was talking about when he was discussing, from his time in the Arctic Dreams, one of the great books, I think. Gosh, I'm making my way through his last big book, Horizon.
God rest his soul.
Yeah. What a wonderful storyteller. But he was asking one of these elders up in Alaska about what fiction and nonfiction are.
Yeah.
And do they exist in Indigenous storytelling, like that dichotomy?
Yeah.
And this elder's response was that it's not necessarily fiction and nonfiction; it's the authentic and the inauthentic story.
Yeah.
And the authentic story is always about us.
Yeah.
And the inauthentic story is about you.
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought that was such an excellent way to put it. And it started me thinking, like, gosh, reality TV is just stories about you. It's
well, this whole culture, I mean, advertising, everything is, you are not good enough. You can be a better you if you buy this. Right?
Advertising.
Everything is about that. But let me just go back, because I think that all the good, true stories that I know and that I like to tell are in some way or another reminding us that it isn't just you. That there isn't a you, there's an us. So a story that does that, again, is what you carry with you after winter into summer as you're going about. You're in this thing that is we. What has happened, I mean, and it let's just go way back for a second, Obi. And I'm being arbitrary here and picking the story of Exodus. So you have the Jews being released, escaping slavery, and they're promised a home. And there's two things that were very toxic about that story. And we understand it. They've been slaves. They've been made homeless. Where do they go? They go out to the desert, and God tells them that they're special and owed a home. Those things started a pattern of stories that went through Christianity, Mohammedanism, all of that. You're special, you're owed a home. So that gives you the entitlement to dominate or take another's home. And we keep replicating that. And what happens in that moment is an us-them relationship that is justified in the religion and the culture versus a we relationship. And by the way, everybody that gets colonized, the same things happened. That religious movement that happened here, the Bole Maru in the 1870s, it was a secret. The Indians gathered and they preached in those roundhouses that the white man was the devil. And the more you associated with the white man, the less you were going to have an afterlife and meet your family. There was even, in some places, the infanticide of mixed blood children. So what happened in that moment as we tried to nationalize in order to survive, we also sat on our tail and became just like the oppressor, an us-them relationship.
Beautiful.
And we forfeited a we. And now all of us, you, me, all of us here, these trees, we have one job, and that is to make a we. And the real stories are those that say, if there's a you, it's to work on a we.
Excellent response.
So,
the last question before we wrap it up.
is it time already?
It's time.
You guys
already.
listening? Obi and I, it's really probably good that we're going into winter because we talk and talk. And if it's summer and we follow these rules, we would be out here with snakes and mountain lions and everything probably crawling all over eating us because we're so much fun talking.
Hours not enough.
Hours, not
hours
enough.
not.
No.
But the last question here, in this time of pomegranates and persimmons and squash and parsnips, what are you? What's your favorite recipe? What are you cooking tonight?
What am I cooking
Yeah,
tonight?
what are you eating? What are you eating in November here, right? I've been God, I made a kabocha squash soup last night. That was fantastic.
That is amazing.
With
That's
celery
really good.
and onions. Yeah.
Well, again, I try to stick towards the grains,
Mm.
and I try to stick towards the fruits and the things that are about. But I wish I had somebody. We just had our acorn fall ceremony, and I really wish I could eat acorn mush every day. They used to say, the old people used to say, if you ate acorn every day, you'd live a long time. Remember, it's the most miraculous food. It's a carbohydrate. It's the carbohydrate that has the highest protein content on Earth.
Yeah.
And we lived on it for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And but it's a process. I've seen the old people make it in the sand, leach it in the sand. But now the way you do it, if I can't even get anybody to do this, they leach it in a nylon stocking in the sink, and then grind it in a blender.
Yeah.
But and then cook it. But it's acorn, and I didn't answer your question because back to shame and guilt. I should be gathering these acorns. I should be taking these pepper nuts and things up here. They're offering them, and when I see them scattered all over the ground, there's great guilt. The trees are offering them, and I have a million excuses. I have books to write. I have things to do. I can't do this. I can't take the time to do it. And a lot of the live oaks, there's acorns. There's different uses for the different kinds of acorns. Live oaks are greasy. They made the best bread. So there wasn't just mush, but there was bread, and then there was the acorn mush where you put in the red earth that was good with full of minerals and things. So there's so many different recipes with acorns.
That's a good cookbook. Where's that cookbook? Black oaks, valley oak,
oaks, live oaks.
Live oaks.
Yeah. The best, of course, were the tan oaks, which we called beautiful tree. And, of course, sadly, the tan oak was the one that's been most vulnerable to sudden oak death.
Right, which has not been as rampant with the drought, which is a strange sort of upside to the drought.
But the trees that have it, being thirsty, are breaking apart and dying.
Yeah.
Because they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
They're getting a whammy. They're getting a relief from more, I was going to say COVID. It is their COVID. Sudden oak. But they are also dry. So many of the trees on the mountain, the oak trees in particular, they're drying. Their branches are just dropping. And the buckeyes are just drying. And big branches falling off.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. So one thing we can certainly end on is I feel if there is a world in the future, we're going to understand that the rain and the moisture is a spirit, is a person. And we're going to be singing and praying to it to come. Please come.
All right. Well, I can't wait to continue the conversation next first Thursday in December already.
What are we going to talk about then? I wanted to talk more about birds, but maybe birds will be, they're always here.
I think it's going to be this cold, but hopefully it'll be raining.
Or we will have a lot of rain. By the way, everybody should look around because if we have a lot of rain or enough rain, there'll be grass here, and the patch of miner's lettuce over there will be huge. That's a good thing to eat, miner's lettuce.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then in January, we're going to begin to see even the first flowers coming up.
Oh, that's a wonderful time.
Mm-hmm.
And then in February the birds start courting. All the hawks and everybody else, the buzzards, start showing off for one another.
Well, this was episode 4 of our 12-part series, Place and Purpose. Please, at any time, reach out to us. Instagram is great, at Place and Purpose Live. He is the Greg Sarris. I am Coyote Thunder on Instagram. And
Coyote Thunder.
What's that?
I like Coyote Thunder.
Barry Lopez book.
Yeah.
Giving Birth to Thunder, Sleeping with His Daughter, How Coyote Built North America. Yes, that's an inspiration from way back when it was first. Anyway, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you
until
so
next
much.
month. All right.
Keep strong, keep well.